This video is brought to you by JohnTerilli.com, the place to go to get in shape and stay that way. There's a free trial available with no credit card required. JohnTerilli.com.
Maz, I really wanted to thank you for taking the time out to do this. Now that, as you can see, I've started these interviews again, right? And I thought I'd kick it off by talking to you and getting some interest back. And I'll probably re-interview some of the people I already have, and I want some of the new people that have just come on the scene, plus some of the legends. You know, some of the legends. I'd like to think that I'd be able to talk Lee Haney into doing an interview, Lee Labrada, perhaps Rich Gaspari, and you know what? Even Nick Walker, because this is another thing. When people come to our site, it's called ClassicBodybuilding.com. Now, we show more classic physiques than any other group. To me, classic bodybuilding is bodybuilding. Classically, this is what bodybuilding is all about. We have the mass monsters. We have the men's physique.
John, the mass monsters have always been there.
They've always been there.
Yeah, they've always been there. You can go back. I mean, in their own respective way, Lou Ferrigno, Pete Rimkowski. Even in Haney's era, you know, there was these big guys. They've always been there. I think the issue we have with some members, and I think this is a symptom of the whole social media thing. Anybody with a strong opinion thinks because they've got an outlet for it, they can give a strong opinion and do so in a manner which they wouldn't do, you know, in a face-to-face situation. Now, I've had several instances, John, where somebody's been very critical of a post I've made. One that sticks in my mind is the one I did on Kai Green. Well, somebody said, far too long, he's so-and-so, he's just a crybaby, he's just blah, blah, you know, you don't need to write this and blah. And, you know, it was a critical post. And initially, I thought, well, you know, why is he saying this? Your initial reaction when faced with criticism of something that you put work into, and the vast majority of people have responded positively, is, oh, he's a crank, get rid of his comment. But I didn't do that. I engaged the member and I asked him what he thought of him as a person and what he thought of him as a physique. Separate the two things. And then this person engaged with me and we had a conversation and we finished. He actually thanked me, you know, for commenting and saying, well, yeah, this is my opinion and thank you for your opinion. And, you know, we don't, and I think that's what we need to do. And
well, that's what we want. Neither of us believe in segregation. Neither of us believing in hiding the truth. Sometimes people just come out with pure, unadulterated garbage, and unfortunately, we have to get rid of it because some of the stuff is ridiculous. But it's almost the site where we want the keyboard warriors, but we want them to behave. You know.
I think it's that fine line because obviously I know your stance about abuse and expletives and swearing.
I'm just not going to put up with it, and it's rude, it's unnecessary, and you know, we've got young kids on there, we've got females, we've got families. I don't want to see that sort of behaviour. I don't want.
John,
I don't want it on there.
Yeah, you mentioned females there. I still think we're underrepresented on the female side.
We certainly are. I don't know why. It'd be great to have a female moderator. It'd be lovely to have one or two women, that are into it, hardcore the way we are, just to hear their side of it. And to me, you know, it's. I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but I've always got to have a woman's opinion. Number one, my family, all the males and everything, but the people that actually run it, that have the last word on everything, are really strong females. It's important for my world, in my world, to always have a woman's opinion and to have their input and to have their okay. Is this okay? There's a lot of sensitive people out there, so I guess if you can impress a woman, even physiques, bodies, it's important. And people take it the wrong way, and they say, "Well, this guy's just like, he needs women to, for whatever reason." And no, it's like the female perspective. I don't like segregation, a men's group or a men's this or a men's that or a woman's. I think you understand where I'm coming from, and I want their opinion. It's important. For the balance. And and I know we have a lot of female friends on that are comfortable to be on there simply because of our stance on language, abuse, bullying, which I guess at some stage I could be accused of, I don't know, maybe both of us could be accused of putting a person in place, or somebody may look at it as bullying. I don't want any of that on that group.
Yeah, I think what it is, John, and I've noticed this more from the members in the US, when, for example, they write something that you don't think adds any value to the discussion, or does anything positive in terms of what they put an opinion, and you delete it, they very much become very defensive about the freedom of speech, and saying, well, stop trying to curtail free speech, and you think, well, hang on a minute, it is free speech, but within the boundaries of our rules. And people get very, very uppity. I've noticed that with a few members, where they get very uppity if they think, they're being censored. But, it's a simple thing. You're in a group that has rules. You're in a group that somebody has created, that somebody's worked hard. And, the fact is they feel that they can come on and say what they want in a manner they want, and then try to cry about, having the rights infringed by being prevented from, expressing their opinion. That sometimes I find that, or I don't know if you've ever seen that, or how.
No, I have, and look, we've read the Weider magazines for years, or at least I have. I started buying his magazines when some of them I saw the last lot of his Mr. America magazine. I saw Muscle Builder go into Muscle and Fitness. I think Mr. America was replaced by Flex, and never once in any of his publications did I see a particular word, that 4-letter word. I never once saw it. I started reading his magazines when I was barely 11 years of age. I've never once seen that sort of language in his magazines. Right? There was some hard things written. I mean, at one stage, his magazine used to publish. I remember they published Mike Mensa's steroid cycle. Was all legal. But never once did I see unnecessary, abusive, bad language. I never saw it, and I'm going to keep it that way. I would like to think that our group is an extension of what Joe Weider did with the magazines. he placed everybody on the covers. There were some people that he put on the cover and he knew it was going to drop his sales, but he still put them on. So Joe Weider was tight with his money, but I also saw him make some moves which were completely contradictory to, making the most amount of money. He wasn't racist. You can't convince me that Joe Weider was a racist. He wasn't racist. He was tight with his money. He was helpful in a lot of different ways, and he took us to a level where it became interesting to the general public. Whoever was there before him, Bernard McFadden and some of the other people, I didn't see a lot of their stuff because I just, I haven't seen a lot of their material, but I know they existed. And
before Weider, actually, Bernard McFadden, or as he called himself, Bernard, because he dropped the D and put an R, because he thought his name sounded more sort of like a lion's roar. You've gone right back to the beginning there, because I think he was one of the early pioneers after Eugene Sandow, because Eugene Sandow had the world's first bodybuilding contest, which was called the Great Contest, held in the Royal Albert Hall in London in 1901. Now, Eugene Sandow had the first contest, but Bernard McFadden, he also had his own record of the world's first international bodybuilding contest. And then he teamed up with a chap called Hopton Hadley, and they published the world's first bodybuilding magazine, which the name is in dispute, but it is documented as Health and Strength. And then Bernard went his own way, he did his own thing, and Hopton Hadley went his way with the magazine, which then led to the formation of the Health and Strength League, which then eventually morphed into NABA. But in between these two, you see, there was another entrepreneur. You must know that, John, who was the world's first bodybuilding tycoon, Earl Liederman.
Yes.
Yeah, Earl Liederman. Now, he operated from humble beginnings, but he went to a 5-story office building just for the courses he sold, and it was the crash, I think, which eventually ended his empire, and he pretty much lost everything. But Earl Liederman, if you ever get the chance,
I know
John,
of the man. I know of.
Very, very shrewd man. I mean, in private, he had a huge fleet of luxury cars. He had all the trappings, but the public image was the blue-collar working class hero. He was one of the guys, the people that he was selling the stuff to. He was one of them. But it's very sad and ironic what happened to him, because he lost everything, and he went from this big tycoon to reading poems on the radio, and because he was quite a good writer, so he'd write these poems and read them out and do quizzes on radios. And then there was a young up-and-coming entrepreneur from Canada who set up a magazine, and he started working for him, and that guy was Joe Weider. So Earl Liederman was working on his magazines, and I always think, the way people's paths, especially in bodybuilding, it's very, very it's quite strange how these paths cross. Eugene Sandow and Charles Atlas, Angelo Siciliano, your own countryman, how they work together. Earl Liederman ended up, after having everything, ended up working for Joe Weider. Now, there's another chap who I think is very important in bodybuilding, but he's largely been consigned to history, is Dan Lurie.
Yes.
Because Dan Lurie and Joe Weider at one time were partners, equal partners. And I have read that the IFBB, the whole notion for it and the whole setup was actually the idea, Dan Lurie's idea. I have read that. I can't say for sure if it's true, but it was Joe Weider that registered the name. And then they sort of parted their ways. But Dan Lurie, he had a good physique and he was quite strong as well. And of course, then he set up his own magazine, Muscle Training Illustrated. And also, something that I wanted to ask you was Lou Ferrigno got his sort of first break with Dan Lurie, and he was with Dan Lurie. Is that is true?
Yes.
And furthermore, his split from Dan Lurie was very, very acrimonious. In fact, to the point he called him some very, very nasty, derogatory names, citing his ethnic background, because Dan Lurie was Jewish. And I think I've read that Lou Ferrigno actually sued him as well. Or that might have been Arnold.
You know what?
There was some litigation.
I'm gonna have to hopefully get an interview with Louis. I'd love to interview Lou Ferrigno.
Actually, John, I have noticed Dan Lurie's son. He's posted and he's commented and liked somewhere. I don't know whether he's in our group.
He is.
And I have seen his name. And I think the truth behind whatever happened with Dan Lurie, it would be wonderful to unearth that and see what actually was the case. Because Dan Lurie is quite an important part of the bodybuilding tapestry.
Absolutely.
Because so I think
Dan Lurie was running contests at the same time that Joe Weider was banning anyone that competed outside the IFBB.
Yeah. In fact, Pat Neve
competed there as well. The Boyako, Sergio Oliva, Chris Dickerson, all the very best of the IFBB guys except Arnold. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if Franco Colombo and Frank Zane ever competed for him. I know Dave Draper actually guest posed for him, and I'm trying to figure out why these guys never got suspended, because that's when it was all real big, and all this the stuff of suspending people. We know where that started and why it started, and unfortunately we can't make this interview too long. But these are all things that we can talk about in the future. Today was more about introducing you, who is an integral part of ClassicBodybuilding.com. You've been there throughout our growth spurt, and this gives me a chance to publicly thank you and tell you how much I really appreciate your loyalty to an Italian. That I don't know if you understand what that means to an Italian. Loyalty.
Absolutely. But to be fair, John, I have to say, it's just a reciprocation of the pasture you've put in me, because I always think it's a two-way thing. Now, if you go back, do you recall that I have actually deleted posts that you've made, which I didn't think were appropriate, and you had absolutely no problem with me doing that. But so I mean, it's a two-way thing.
Look, to me, that's a person who's got my back. That's all that meant to me. You know, that's a person that's got my back. That's what that meant, just to let you know. And you saw how I took it. You didn't get one word out of me, did you? I just accepted it.
No. Because as I say, anything I do, any decision I make, or anything I do, will always be in the interest of the group. One thing you don't do is compromise the integrity of the group. The group integrity is always paramount. It has to be professional. Yeah. All the team, whatever happens behind the scenes is irrelevant. All the team must have a united front in the group, because these are all things that people pick up on, and people look for these things. So for me, these things are paramount. I think people are thinking setting up these groups. I've seen a few spring up, and fully enough, Steve Jackson's his TikTok group is called ClassicBodybuilding. Which is, I think I may have mentioned this to you before. I think they say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Yeah. But I still think it's odd if his Facebook group is called The Look, but his TikTok group is called Classic Bodybuilding. It's so
there's a place for him, but Steve loves the classic look. He segregates. I'm not into that.
Yeah, I think that it restricts restricts you just as to how far you can go, because it goes up to a certain point and that's it.
Look, apartheid, segregation, separation, all that sort of crappy behaviour. Just I don't want it to exist.
We end up alienating a lot of members that way. It's like we're coming back to the point you made earlier about, people saying it's classic bodybuilding and yet you've got mass monsters. But the thing is, sometimes you put up a more modern bodybuilder and it gets more likes than perhaps some of the older stuff.
There has to be education. Like these mass monsters at the moment are creating their own problem, which I'd like to address, which is food for thought in the future. The whole time I've been wondering what this guy does for his biceps, because they look overdeveloped. You've got overdeveloped biceps.
I think, to be fair, I think it's probably the angle.
No, I just think you got a really good pump going before you did the interview, regardless of what you want to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, that's quite a compliment coming from you.
What I wanted to know from you is your background. When you did compete in bodybuilding, correct?
No.
Because I once saw a photo of someone. You put up a photo, and I wasn't sure who it was. And I said, wow, this guy looked really good in his competitive. So you've not really been a competitive bodybuilder. You've got all this knowledge, and I could have sworn the stuff that you've obviously, you've immersed yourself in this so deeply.
The thing is, John, now at the age of 49, I can do something in the morning, put something somewhere, and then I can spend several hours later, I can spend half an hour looking for it and not remember where it is. And yet, some of the stuff that I would read, say back in the 80s in the magazines, is crystal clear in my head. I think what it was, I was fortunate because I had an older brother who developed an interest in bodybuilding, and he started training at home originally, and then he started getting these magazines. Of course, this was the sort of 80s, where we're a family that's come over from Pakistan. My father was already here. He'd already been here since the sort of 60s, working, and very low paid, the manual jobs in this area, which was normally the textile mills. So we had very, very little in the way of money.
So where are you from? What part are you?
Pakistan.
No, I'm talking about in where you currently reside now.
We're in England, in the north, West Yorkshire. You know Ian Harrison?
Yes.
Right. Well, Ian Harrison is literally about 8 or 9 miles up the road from where I am. So he's from Pudsey, Leeds.
Is he not living in Florida at the moment? That's where he's originally from, where you are, but I think at the moment he's living in Florida, yeah?
Yeah, he's in Florida at the moment, but he's originally from this area.
Okay.
And so that's where I am at the moment. And where was we? Yeah, you were asking me about the bodybuilding. So my brother, he was heavily into bodybuilding, and of course, his hero at the time was the most famous bodybuilder at the time, who wasn't actually competing, which was Arnold. See, now I can go back and I can remember Arnold from the sort of 84, 85, I would say. And through him, I had access to these magazines. Now, my brain at the time, I can only say, must have been like a sponge. Because when you find something that interests you, fascinates you, it's very, very easy to immerse yourself in it, to learn it. Now, originally, the magazines we would have were the cheaper end of the scale, which was the Bodybuilding Monthly. Now, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure, no, you do remember, because you know Chris Lund, and he was the photographer.
Yep.
Now, he was the photographer for Bodybuilding Monthly, and the chap that...
was that a newspaper or a magazine?
No, it was actually a bona fide magazine.
Magazine.
And,
no,
yeah,
you're right. I remember it. Him and Peter McGough were doing something together?
Yeah, Peter McGough, I think I'm not sure if Peter actually wrote for Bodybuilding Monthly, because Peter he must have done, because he had to have done, because Bodybuilding Monthly at the time was the only UK magazine, the only magazine in the whole of UK. No, John, I might be getting mixed up here, because we had the Health and Strength, didn't we?
Yes.
Which predated it by a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, which was the NABA, and that went back quite a Health and Strength, and I think the US equivalent was Strength and Health.
You currently have a newspaper called Beef It or Beef or something.
Yeah, Beef. Yeah, Beef It, I think.
Yeah.
I believe that was Peter McGough's, but Peter McGough had his own magazine called. I don't know. See, this is the thing now. Something that I could remember a day or two ago now. But he had his own magazine that he published with his wife Anne.
Okay.
Which they had a little, but anyway, Bodybuilding Monthly was the first magazine that I actually saw. It wouldn't be very thick, but it would be very, very earthy and organic. Black and white photos, text. There'd be a bodybuilder of the month, and it would actually feature the big bodybuilders. I mean, I can remember all the bodybuilders, the famous bodybuilders of the era on the cover. Mike Menser doing his crucifix pose, Danny Padilla, Bill Grant, Bill Richardson, they would all be featured on it. And of course, having never seen anything like that, it was just, to me, they were just like superhuman.
Who inspired you the most? Who was it? Was it there one particular individual who, you were inspired by, and they got you over the line? There's always one out of a group of heroes that you may have had. Who would that have been for you?
I mean, I would say Arnold was there, but you see, now that's quite a tough question, because I don't think I actually had one specific bodybuilder, because I would read about all of them. Every single one that caught my attention, I would try to find out what I could. And so I wouldn't have had one specific one. Arnold was definitely there, simply because he was the most famous. You know, he transcended bodybuilding. But other than that, Samir Banu sticks in my mind, simply because when I become aware of bodybuilding and I had that interest in it, he was the Mr. Olympia. So it always sticks in my mind, because my brother had a poster of his on the wall, and it said, and I can see it now, Samir to eternity, the Lebanese lion. And of course, you know, with him being of sort of Arab descent, that was another thing, you know, you kind of looked, you know, for a connection. So we thought, this guy, I mean, that sticks in my mind. Another guy who I was always enthralled by, I have to say, was Matt Mahendernall. Simply because at the time I didn't realise how good his structure was. See, now I can look back and I can analyse a physique, and you can see the difference. But he just looked good. Rick Valenti, I think it was as much the physiques as the charisma that they brought as well. Rick Valenti, Mike Christian as well, because he'd always have that huge smile.
Yeah, yeah.
Every time you saw him, he'd have that smile.
Yeah.
And there's some things, you know, now I can say, well, this is why, because they have that charisma. Yourself, John, you probably came to my attention when was the Olympia ever held in Australia?
Yeah, no. What probably happened in 1980 when they had the Mr. Olympia, the famous Mr. Olympia, which I'll eventually write a book on it. All these guys trained at the same gym that I did. Okay. They tanned on the same beach that I tanned, which was Bondi Beach. The gym was just 2 blocks away from Bondi Beach, and I won a contest that was called the Best in Australia, which was the opener to the Mr. Olympia. So the 2 winners that day was John Terilli and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I'm not sure how much. Well, people from all over the world would have seen it, because we had a huge audience and there were so many magazine editors and photographers there. So I'm not surprised that you would have seen it. And that was probably my first big win. But look, my start sounds a lot like yours. Okay, there was Arnold, but there was a conglomerate of people that actually impressed me, which is going to bring me to my next thing that I was going to discuss. We were going to do an interview with Pat Neve, and he couldn't do it, right? So I know we are both, you know, we know of him, we know a lot of stuff about him, and I wanted to go over a few things about Pat, because he was one of these individuals. You can only get, you know, after you've seen enough of Arnold, you're like, well, who else is there? All right, so I came into it when the top 3 guys were Sergio Oliva, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Bill Pearl. Right, that's what I walked into. Then after that, I'm thinking, you know, I read this huge article on Bill Pearl and how he was going to prove that he was the best ever by entering and the 1971 Pro Mr. Universe, and you know, a lot of things happened at that show. Arnold never made it, and it was probably good advice that Joe Weider gave him. Bill Pearl won it.
Was that Bill Pearl's? If I could interrupt, was that Bill Pearl's last contest?
Last contest, right? So after seeing all of this, I started looking. I'm going, well, who else is there? And I started getting impressed by a lot of the English guys through the magazines that you discussed, but also the American guys. You know, then I'm looking at these guys. You know, I'm a teenager who just started training, and I'm looking at Richard Baldwin, and there was a guy that kept winning best back. His name was Willie Johnson, Doug Beaver, Bob Gallucci, who was natural Mr. America, and then Pat ended up on the cover of this Iron Man magazine doing this side bicep, and when I saw that, I'm going, well, you know, he's not Arnold, but he's like, you know, Pat's chest and biceps, like Arnold, they're his two best body parts, except Pat had an incredible waistline to go with it, a set of abs and a small waist. And, you know, the guy left me speechless, and I'm going, well, you were asking for it, and here it is. He's somebody else to concentrate on instead of Arnold. You know, and I'm thinking, well, you got a big job ahead of you, John. Arnold's one story, but this guy, he's the USA champion, and look how good he is. You know, and you know a lot about him. You know, the things that impressed me about Pat was the low body weight. I thought, like, to me, it looked like he was 220 or 230, the size of his chest and arms. Then later on I realised he wasn't a really tall guy, and he wasn't a really heavy guy. And, you know, he was setting world records in the bench press and winning a national title. So, I mean, this guy, just like, you know, when you're a teenager and you're just starting off and going, well, you know, this guy's got a lot of qualities. How are you ever going to be able to match all these guys, or, you know, catch them or even beat them? With Pat, what was the first thing you ever saw that impressed you? And I just wanted to say this just to pay respect to him, because for whatever reason he couldn't make it today. Hopefully, if we say enough about him, at some stage he'll want to come on here and talk. But you know about Pat. Tell me what you've seen, the qualities that impressed you about him.
Well, to be honest, I saw Pat briefly in maybe a couple of the magazines back then. Now, you're probably aware that Pat didn't really have any affiliation with Joe Weider. So he was never in the Weider magazines.
No, but he did do some work for him, I believe, at some stage, and I don't know why he never made it into the Weider magazines. That's something I've never been able to work out, and that's one of the questions I was going to ask him.
Well, yeah, well, there's a very good reason for that. Now, I don't know if you know this. Joe Weider did ask Pat, did request a meeting with him, and he was going to ask Pat to go along with the IFBB delegation to South Africa in '75. So Pat was in the conversation. So Pat went to see Joe, and there was a few things that was going through Pat's mind, because he had a young family at the time, and his wife Vicky was at his side. I mean, I've heard Pat relay this, and I've read about it, and Pat was brutally honest. He asked Joe Weider, how are you going to look after me? So effectively he was just asking him, am I going to be looked after? Because I've got 2 young kids and a family to think about. And I think Joe took great umbrage at this question, because I think when it came to money, Joe wasn't one that was, shall we say, overly generous in recompensing the athletes. Quite the opposite, in fact. Now, when Pat asked this question, Joe didn't give him an answer. Robbie Robinson was also in the room at the same time. So Joe didn't give him an answer. He turned his back to Pat and he started having a conversation with Robbie. And Pat stood there in somewhat state of confusion for a few minutes. And then he walked out. He walked out of the room with his wife, Vicky. And that, I believe, was the last meeting he had with Joe. Him and Joe never crossed paths again. And that was the end of it. So he was never a factor in the IFBB after that. You know, which I think, you know, sometimes I think, was it Joe's loss? Was it Pat's loss? But the success Pat went on to have, you know, you could say that he did okay for himself.
Yeah, well, he did more than okay. You know, what he did with cars and even now all the cars that he's got as toys, you know, the car yards, he was a top salesman. I wished I could have asked him all this. And, you know, I think at one stage he may have even had a gym, but I didn't know about this meeting because, you know what, there's a reason why I never made it into that clan, and it didn't happen exactly like that. But I don't know. I kind of got a sense of things, and I know that when Arnold had to get paid, he had to chase Joe Weider all over Los Angeles to get his weekly pay, or you know, or monthly, whatever it was. But he had to. Yeah. You'd have to chase him, and you know what? I wouldn't have been able to have put up with that at all. Well, you know, and in fact, I'm actually surprised that Bertil Fox. Yeah. That he actually, I think he was a Weider athlete at one stage, and I'm not sure how that went. I know a lot of other things about Bertil that a lot of people don't, because I'm very close. I'm very close to Lincoln Webb. Do you know Lincoln?
Yeah. A friend of his. Yeah.
Yep. So Lincoln's in Australia, and I actually need to interview him as well. So I, you know, Bertil and the sort of person that he was, I think probably, I don't know how it went, but it's very interesting that you brought this up, and I guess there's a lot of things we don't know. You seem to know a lot of things that I don't. You're a treasured moderator. In fact, I know you love that site, and you've helped us build it to where it is. And there's a next level that we're going to that maybe I shouldn't even talk about, but we're going to have that discussion in private. So Maz, what next for you?
Firstly, thank you, for those wonderful compliments. And I should say, it's very much a labour of love. Now, as well as when I'd be looking at these magazines, I'd be looking at the pictures, but I would also be reading the different articles. And, over time, there's certain writers whose words, you find, interesting, you enjoy. I mean, Peter McGough, absolutely. Not only because he was a fantastic writer, may he rest in peace, but the thing that I would say to you, John, is one of the things that really encouraged me was Peter liking my posts, making comments, telling me my writing was good. And at the time, it was quite surreal because there was this guy whose work I used to read, and he was liking my post, and it was all a bit surreal. And he gave me a lot of encouragement, as have you. But the thing is, it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I think with writing, there's two things I say that you know, if you want to write, there's two things that you have to absolutely bear in mind. One thing is what you're writing has to be correct, has to be factual. You know, just make sure whatever you're writing is correct. Check and double check. Furthermore, anything you write should be structured. You know, there should be a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, otherwise it just becomes one, you know, long ramble. And also is make it interesting. You know, the mark of any good writer is to place the reader in the middle of what they're writing. Yes. And that's something I always try. I don't probably, you know, I'm not always successful. A lot of times, you see, I can't be objective with what I write, because a lot of times I read it and I think, well, that's not very good. I could have maybe substituted another word for this. And, you know, sometimes you're critical. But it's absolutely, I enjoy. And another thing, a lot of the things that I, you know, for me, I myself in the process of writing learn things as well. So, you know, and again, it comes when it's something that you're interested in or something you like, it's easy to gain knowledge on that, because it's always the subject that interests you that you know you do well in. So, you know, sometimes I'm reading things and I'm thinking, well, I didn't know this. I mean, that's quite surprising. And with the internet, you know, you've got so much at your disposal. So, I mean, if I read something that, you know, I think, well, oh, I didn't know this, I will always make sure to check and double check to make sure it is actually true. Because a lot of things you read, you know, nowadays, you know, some of it isn't, you know, it's of dubious, you know, it's not necessarily true. Now, going forward, I think for myself, you know, I'm part of this group, which I love being a part of. And we've had the ups and downs. I mean, John, you know where it started. I mean, I joined it, I think we had about 2,000 members. And I mean, you know, you had a good foundation, because first off, you know, with yourself being an ex-pro bodybuilder, that in itself is a unique selling point. The fact is, you've been there, you've seen it, you've done it. So John Terilli, you know, on that group heading, John Terilli will always sell. And of course, you know, with it being classic bodybuilding and the physique that you had, you know, there's no, I mean, I'll tell you, when I saw a photo of you doing a front double biceps with Bob Harris, and I took a critical look, and I thought, you know, Bob Harris is renowned for his shape, his aesthetics, but in that front double biceps pose, you was actually beating him. You had the better of Bob Harris. So, you know, in terms of physique, you know, you're right there. And you don't necessarily need me to tell you that, because you've only to read I'll give you a prime example. The post I put up of the history of the Nava universe, the post itself had about 80 or 90 likes. That's the whole post. Your photo on its own had probably double that number. So just the photo that I used, and I think I deliberately used that photo, even though you pointed out that was an earlier photo. Yep. And when you won the universe, I think you was quite a bit bigger than that.
I later put on about an additional 30 pounds on top of that. Towards the end of my career.
But I deliberately chose that photo because, like I said, I thought that was your sweet spot. So, yeah, in terms of going forward, for me, it's more of the same. Is to keep because the thing is, for me, the group, I don't think there's anybody's bigger than the group. You know, we're all part of the group, and you know, our focus should always be how can we make it better. And Gareth, the litmus test, which was a very simple analogy, but sometimes there's beauty in simplicity. The simple things are the best. Is it interesting? Will it engage members? Just ask yourself those questions. And I think, you know, if we as the moderators can always have that in mind, because when I post something, the first question is, now if somebody else posted that, how would I feel? Would I find it interesting? And if I can say the answer is yes, then yes, make the post. But for me, in terms of writing, John, it's something I enjoy. I can literally pick up the phone and just think of something. Like, for example, I did a post earlier today about the Night of Champions, you know, which is a contest that has always been a very prominent contest in its own right. I mean, the Olympia has been the Olympia, but the Night of the Champions, you know, had its own cachet, and it was Wayne DeMilia's baby, because he started that in 1978. Now, I believe he started working with the IFBB in 73. So 5 years later, he conceived the idea of the Night of the Champions, held in New York City, and he ran that from 1978 through to 2004. So, I mean, that's a good 26 years, although they didn't have a contest in 1984 for some reason. I don't know why. And that's something that I thought, well, I better find out why. Because something like that will crop up. Well, why wasn't there one in 84? There must have been a reason. But I've not looked into that. But simply on the Night of Champions, I got the phone and I just wrote a few lines that I already knew, that it was Wayne DeMilia. He did it in 78. He'd have these bizarre spectacles. You probably remember when he had Mohammed Makawi. I think in the 82 Night of Champions, riding a camel. And I don't know if you saw his interview with Patrick Bet-David. He had to have, well, they had this camel walking on stage and it kept pooping all over the stage. So he had to have these cleaners in the background and they had to run on and clean. And the other one that sticks in my mind is is it the 1990 or the 91 Night of Champions? Now, that was one where Dorian Yates was dressed as a preacher. Okay. And there were all these coffins with the bodybuilders that had left for the WBF. And he was bringing them back and they were jumping out of the coffins. I think that was the 1990. It may have been 91.
Look, it may have been. I vaguely remember reading about that. And you know what? I'm going to have to interview Wayne because there's a lot of questions that I want to ask him, not only to do with moving forward and, you know, what's happening next with him, but also there's a lot of unanswered things from the past that I personally would like to find out from Wayne. You know, it's a pity that the IFBB has split up the way that it has. Most people don't realise that it's now two different federations. And, you know, Wayne's doing stuff in the United States, and I've often asked and wondered why he doesn't continue with pro shows. And I think the quick answer was there's no real money in it. But then I'm thinking, well, how come the other side of the IFBB runs shows, a lot of shows in the United States. And, you know, they're still giving a lot of prize money for the Arnold Classic and the Mr. Olympia. There's a lot of things I want to ask Wayne. I may have to have a chat with him before I get him on here, but he's one dude that I want to interview. And
a very, very interesting, very interesting gentleman.
Yeah, he is. You know, and I've known him for a long time. So that'll be something that's up and coming. You know what? Like, you're going to be a regular, I think, because we need to cover a lot of stuff that you know, some of the people are very touchy or sensitive. You'll talk about anything, and sometimes I need to bounce things off other people just to get a message out there. So I think you've just been given another role now, other than what you do in the group.
Right up until about 10 years ago, I started getting really, really bad back problems. You know, really chronic backache, sciatica, and it transpired I had slipped discs, and I put up with it for so long, and it got to the point where one day I woke up and my left leg was more or less paralyzed. The doctor handed me a note and sent me straight to A&E. A&E, within 10 minutes, they had me in a MRI scanner. So they scanned the back, and they got the scans back, and while they were waiting for them, the doctor was examining different parts of my body, poking, prodding at the back. Can you feel this? Can you feel this? And I was wondering, well, what's he doing? They got the results of the scan back, and they says, you know, this is my local hospital. This, you know, it's beyond our remit. We're going to have to send this to the big city hospital, which is about 8 miles away. They got these scans, and they said, you know, this patient has to be sent up straight away, you know, for emergency surgery. It later transpired that losing the use of my legs would have been the least of my worries. I'd have lost the ability to go to toilet both 1 and 2, because the disc bulge was that bad. It was impinging on the nerves at the back. And it was just through some miracle that it hadn't got to the point where I was already paralyzed. I mean, the surgeon himself, who I saw at midnight on Friday when they transported me there, he, after signing 3 disclaimer forms that the surgery was being done at my risk, he says, well, we can't understand how you've still got the use of your legs. He says, I've seen far less serious slip discs result in paralysis, and it's just a miracle, really. So I had the surgery. This was in 2013. I spent a week in hospital, then they sent me home for recovery. At the time, I wasn't aware that I should try to be as active as possible. I had a whole load of opiate-based painkillers, tramadol, I even had diazepam, cocodamol, the whole lot. And while recovering at home, I developed a DVT in the right leg, unbeknown to me, brought about by inactivity and exacerbated by the fact that I was pumped full of painkillers, which was slowing my circulation. Now, I had the DVT for about a week, not realising what it was, completely oblivious, just watching my right leg swelling and getting worse and worse. So one day I went to the hospital because it got so bad that I was walking up the stairs to go to the toilet. I was out of breath at the top. I thought, this can't be right. It must be the medication, not knowing that it was the DVT. So the doctor saw my leg, measured it. He says, well, I suspect you've got a DVT, go straight to A&E. So it was kind of like deja vu. So I went back there. They did the blood test, which you probably know. We call it the D-dimer test, and it measures fibrous tissue in your bloodstream. And my levels were way elevated because there was a clot. And then the second confirmation they do is they do the ultrasound scan that they do for pregnant women. So to locate the clot. Well, it didn't take the operator very long at all. Literally within seconds she had it, and she tracked it right up to the top of my thigh. So it started in the deep veins, which as you probably know are in the calves, and the clot had worked its way all the way up to the top of my thigh in the course of a week. Now again, it was just through some major miracle that in that period a piece hadn't broken off and got into my lungs to cause a pulmonary embolism or gone to the brain, both of which are potentially fatal. So then I spent quite some time on warfarin and just going through the whole thing of recovery, and it took me quite a few years. I mean, in that period I wasn't working. I mean, even now I'm not working full time. I do a few bits and bobs just to keep me going, but I'm not working. I stopped doing the physical graft, which is essentially all I've done. So it took me several years, John, to recover from not only the back injury, because now I'm post-surgery, but my saviour, and I tell this to anybody that will listen, was the gym. Now, when I spoke to the doctor and I mentioned about going back into some form of training, well, of course, oh, no, there's no way you can do that again. You've had surgery, and they kind of just warned me off against it. And I remember, and I had this conversation with my younger brother literally a few hours ago.
Maz, if you don't mind, what age were you when this happened?
I had the surgery at 40, which was in 2013. So I just turned 40, 2013. But my back issues probably went back, probably at least another, I'd say about 15 years, because I'd have the pains and the aches. But when you're young, you know, you're aching one day and the next day you're back up and you're doing cartwheels.
You've obviously trained for years with heavy weights in a gym, right?
Yeah.
And you've just said your saviour was going back to the gym. Now, the cause of the injury was probably lifting or moving things around. What difference? What's the difference? You know what I'm talking about. What's the difference? Because you were a load caused you the injury, and now
Absolutely.
A load is also the saviour. Can you explain that? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It was heavy lifting in the gym, caused by naivety, over eagerness, incorrect form. The thing, John, which I'm sure you can relate to, and I say this with all due respect, is with age comes wisdom. With age comes absolute wisdom. Now, I'm still training what I would call quite hard, but I'm training a lot smarter. So straight off the bat, I can't do deadlifts. I can't do bent over rowing. Squats are out of the question.
So then what was it, your work that caused this, or was it a combination of bad lifting?
Combination of,
yeah.
I mean, quite an astute observation from yourself. Combination of both the gym and then work, which was a lot of heavy lifting as well. And it was just the cumulative effect of having the injury in the first place, and then over time it getting worse and worse. I mean, the surgeon said that the disc damage was that bad and that old that practically, I mean, when they say a slip disc, the disc doesn't move as such. The term slip disc is a misnomer. What actually happens is the edge gets pinged, and there's like a gel inside, and it's that gel that starts leaking out. Now that's what they call the slip disc. Now mine, the hole on the L4 and L5, I think it was, the whole of the substance inside had leaked out. And it had been there that long. The surgeon said it had become calcified. It had become bone-like. The disc had become bone-like. So what they'd done is they took it all out, they removed it, and there was a little bit of damage to the discs above, because obviously if you think of a foundation, if the bottom of the foundation goes, there is a bit of a knock-on effect above. So there was a little bit of above, but I mean, they were okay. So my question was, well, if you've taken the disc out, what, do you not replace it with something else? They goes, no, the cavity kind of fills itself. And I suppose that's been borne out by my own experience, because I had the surgery in 2013. So we're now in 2022, 9 years later, and touch wood, my lower back pain is something that's more or less gone. Now my nerve damage, now that's another thing. John, I mean, I've had a fascinating kind of insight, I should say, as to the biomechanics of the body. The simple act of walking up the stairs, I couldn't do properly, simply because I couldn't modulate it, because the sensations were different. The feeling was different in my right leg because I had the full feeling. It was different in the left leg. So I effectively had to learn how to walk.
What did you do? How did you overcome that?
Well, initially, the left leg would be very jerky. So because I was doing it at the normal speed, so I slowed everything down. Every action was deliberate. So I would put my right leg and then the left leg. Because if you think when you're doing it, we do it without thinking. Walking up and down stairs, there is so much movement and so many different muscles working in coordination, relaxing and contracting. As you put your foot down, you're slowing down. As it reaches the step, you take away any momentum. Then you switch into the right leg. And, if you were to write all this down, it'd probably fill a page, and that's just walking down the steps. And I effectively learned to do it again, and I slowed everything down. And now I can actually walk fairly quickly. I would say I can run up the steps now. Okay. I can't really run sprint. I can't do that because of the difference in the legs. However, I can still walk.
There's a lot of people that don't realise certain things, and I'll give you 3 examples. Ronnie Coleman, Dexter Jackson, and Dennis Wolf. If you notice, even when Ronnie was at his best and Dexter was at his best, but I noticed this later on in their careers, and it happened to me, their inner calf started fading away. And this is not a genetic thing saying that, the calves were no good or they were short or whatever. It's nothing to do with genetics. But the inner calf when Dexter was competing, it looked like he literally could not flex it. There was an outer head, and towards the end of Ronnie's career, I noticed that early in his career, but towards the end, his inner calves were shriveling away. They weren't there. Dennis Wolf, I'm not sure what happened to his calves, but when you see the amount of heavy leg work that Ronnie Coleman did, and I know Dexter was like right into heavy leg work. I did a lot of heavy leg work, which it was to my detriment. It certainly wasn't needed. I did really dumb things with deadlifting. I'm not even going to get into the stupidity and the injuries that I got from deadlifting. But you are aware that any sort of damage to the lower back. One doctor, because it's a fairly uncommon injury, one doctor named it the double crush syndrome. So you have a group of nerves that actually sit underneath the popliteus, which is like the upper calf, and this branch of nerves sit right underneath that. And when they start to get affected, you'll get this happening to your calves. I'm not sure if you're aware of that or if you've noticed it on yourself, but yours just seems like it's a problem you had to one side. But this is a common problem that I've seen, and I always look for it, because when it happened to me, it just slowly crept up, and I noticed one day I'm going, but what's happened to your inner calves? You know, like I can contract them, and I've actually improved it. I've improved the situation, and I need to go back and do more, because this is just one of the things that, you know, you do as you get old to regenerate. But I just thought I'd point that out. And, you know, even now, if you look at people like Tony Pearson, who's at that, you know, he's 65, he's even mentioned that, you know, his legs, his thighs, they're right there. They're as good as what they've ever been. And all he needs to keep them or even improve them is just a 45-pound plate on each side of the bar. It's for 20 reps, 20 slow reps, and for him, they just blow his thighs up. So I'm not sure if you've seen this phenomenon that I'm talking about on these bodybuilders.
Yeah, I have noticed I have noticed, but probably haven't paid as much attention to it as you have, because I've not known. I've just thought maybe it's just a difference. I wouldn't say I've noticed it specifically, because on some bodybuilders you do notice it. In fact, in a similar vein, I don't know if you noticed Marcus Rule, as his career went on, he started getting the split in his chest.
Yeah.
The gap got wider and wider.
Yeah,
and is that a similar sort of
thing? There was a wrestler, Big Papa Pump.
Scott Steiner.
Yeah, he's one got to the point where it was ridiculous. I'm not sure what happened, but I did notice Branch Warren started developing a gap. It looks like a torn pec that was torn from the inside, not the outside, Branch Warren. And again, it's something he didn't have at the beginning of his career. You know, so I'm not sure what that injury is all about. But again, it's another one that's probably wear and tear and doing unnecessary things, lifting unnecessarily heavy weights is probably what brings it on.
Well, Branch is renowned for his, shall we say, loose style of lifting.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's probably something that's completely sort of opposite to what the perceived wisdom says of control and contraction. But, you know, you can't argue with the results. But, I mean, you can't do that indefinitely. You know, as time goes, I think your training has to adapt, and you have to sort of, change your style and change the tempo as your body changes. I mean, the problem, John, and this is something that's affected me and probably affects pretty much everybody, is adapting your mind to your body. Because up in the head, we're as strong and we're as enthusiastic as we are. And I think people have a tendency to match or even try to exceed previous glories well, I used to do this much at that time, I can still do it. And in your head, you're always as strong as you once were. And you always think, well, I want to keep improving and I want to beat what I did. But the body isn't the same, you know, the wear and tear. So, I mean, that mental aspect, I think, is very important. And that's where maybe a lot of people, fail because they don't adapt mentally, because they're still trying to train as they were 20 years ago.
Well, you're right, but I mean, you know, even Dorian perpetrated this, and Mike Mensa before him, and Arthur Jones. Heavier weights mean bigger muscles, and that's not correct. I just don't agree with that, because not only when I started training did I develop most of my body from not training that way, but when I got, you know, I'll tell you the truth, when I got to the gym, I made very little progress beyond what I did in my own house. Very little progress. But I progressed. Then to put on the last 2 inches of muscles on my arm, I actually had to use a third of the weight. This is while I was still competitive. I still hadn't gotten to my best. To put my last 2 inches on, I had to train with lighter weights, not heavier weights. You know, I got to the point where I heard that Arnold had curled 280 pounds for 3 reps, so I had to do that. You know, lying extensions with 3 plates for reps is ridiculous. In order to put that last 2 inches on, I used a third of that, and the way I did it was a lot harder than lifting 280 pounds or 315 pounds for lying extensions, which was totally ridiculous. Now, that last 2 inches was put on by contracting the muscle. The muscles don't know how much weight is on the bar. They just know the efficiency of the rep and the contraction, nutrition, and rest and recovery. That's how I made the last bunch of good progress on my physique. And that's basically how I also started training. Because I didn't know how to train and I had to learn whatever I could by my own means and methods. Like, I mean, I read an article once where it was a chest article where it spelled out a workout, and because it didn't have any photos of the workout, I looked at bench press and I said, what does bench press or prone press, it was written down, 3 times 12, what does that mean? I had no idea. So to build my chest, I thought, okay, this says prone press. I said prone means laying down, so maybe you've got to lift the bench. You know, prone bench press. So when I started my chest training, it was laying on the ground, bench pressing a coffee table. You know, that's how I started. I go, you know, I didn't understand anything, and it wasn't until years later that I had already developed a physique, mainly through calisthenics and bodyweight exercises, skipping, elastics. Then I started tying a brick on the end of a stick, and then I progressed to a pipe that was in the garden, because we were growing tomatoes, which, and you know, you need to keep the plant upright. So I said, that looks good. I pulled that out of the ground and tied a brick on each end. Before that, it was a broken stick that I nailed together. It was very humble beginnings, but that's where I learnt everything. And now it's called time under tension. You know, so heavier weights don't equal bigger muscles. That's for sure. And I think if Dorian had a different mindset, he probably could have continued. I think after his first injury, he had surgery and he came back into the gym and saw how much weaker he was, and he gave up. That was the end of it, from what I read. And I have to keep repeating it. I don't believe that continuous. I mean, if that's the only way to progress, to me, that's the crudest form of intensity available. Heavier weights, just heavier weights. To me, it's about form, feeling it. Sometimes even not doing the exercises prescribed, using a little bit of body English to get the maximum out of the movement. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I've always said that for me personally, response is by and large, it's different for everybody. There isn't generally a one-size-fits-all way of training. However, you can't change the fundamentals. The fundamentals will be the fundamentals. And you made a very good point when you said the muscles, they can't see the weight. So whether you're lifting a broom handle with whatever cement on it, or you've got the very latest barbell and some brand new disc, your muscles can't see that. The muscles only experience the tension. And I think because going to the gym is about getting bigger and about getting stronger. So generally most gym goers new want to get big and strong as quickly as possible. And I think unless you educate yourself with things that you've just mentioned, you know, correct form, feel, I mean, time and attention. You see, most people now in the gym, you could walk into any gym up and down and say, well, when you're training, how much time and attention do your muscles spend? And most people wouldn't know what you meant.
No.
Simply because, you know, they don't know. You know, most gyms now, they've got an army of personal trainers. And, you know, this is not a slight on personal trainers, because they have their place, and those that know their craft are invaluable. But nowadays, when you can get a personal training qualification with a 2-week course from Facebook, you know, it makes you think. I mean, just and these guys are out there training people. They've actually got clients, people paying them money, and for me, that's an utter folly. So, you know, coming back to the point you're making about training, I think for me, heavyweights as part of an overall routine, you know, yes, I think every now and again, you know, you want to go heavy, but, you know, to do that every workout, week in, week out, is an absolute recipe for disaster. And, you know, you've mentioned it with Dorian. I mean, you know, people say he was falling to pieces at the 97 Olympia, you know, and that he shouldn't have won. But then we're going down another subject as to whether he should or shouldn't have won.
Yeah.
But it can't be denied. His arms were gone. I believe he had a quad injury as well. So, you know, he was literally falling to pieces. And that was as a direct result of what he was doing in the gym. You know, that didn't happen, you know, when he was at home having a cup of tea, or that was as a result of what he did in the gym. Similarly with Ronnie, as you mentioned earlier, ultra heavy, you know, huge weights. But today Ronnie's crippled. Now, I know there's the issue of the many surgeries he's had, but those surgeries were only as a result of the problems caused by the heavy lifting. And, you know, again, the evidence is there. So to think that you have to lift heavy all the time is a complete folly.
But I mean, even powerlifters have, some of the better powerlifters and also Olympic lifters, they have a percentage system. So when they go into the gym to be their best on contest day, they have to cycle their weights, right? So it's not just like having a light day or a deload. There's a science behind it, and some guys who are just naturally strong, they fall in love with the movement and they become a bench press expert. This is why I would have loved to have discussed all of this with Pat, because the guy was incredible in many different aspects, and you yourself, the amount of knowledge that you have, I would have thought you're a lot older, and you're not. You're not even 50. You're
49.
49. You've got a lot of knowledge. You've got a lot of expertise. You know a lot of things that I've never even heard of. And on the site, some of those stories that you put together are just absolutely incredible. And like when I start reading your stuff, it's addictive. You read it to the end. There's never one thing that I've started reading that you did, and I've turned away from it. I read the whole thing. I hope you don't mind, but I actually don't know what you do for a living, and I don't care. But it's just out of interest. I've never realised what you actually do, because you write so well. I'm thinking this guy must write for a major publication or something, but maybe not.
No. The short answer to that, John, is as little as possible. I started working, if I go back to the beginning, I have to profess I'm just educated to school level, what we call the GCSEs. I did go to college for 1 year, but then at the end I didn't complete my college education because something turned up. We had some family issues and I had to stop. And then I started working. So I haven't got any formal qualifications. I've always had a love for reading, and I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy writing.
Again, look, I wanted to say thank you to you. If there's anybody you want to mention, or a favourite gym, a favourite family member, or a coach, or somebody who's been there for you, as now's your chance to plug somebody, or say whatever you want, or whatever. Here's your chance right now.
Well, you kind of put me on the spot. I mean, in terms of thanking, I'd say everybody has played a part in my life, in terms of getting me to where I am now. I think, life's a journey, and the older you get, the more you realise, it's not about, sort of having it, having the whatever you want here and now, or always chasing that thing which you haven't got. Is be content in what you have got. Is contentment with what you have, as opposed to going after what you want. And I think, in terms of, I think we're living in a society, a culture of where we're kind of brainwashed into believing that we need all these things. When in actual fact, we need very little. And I think, just using our brains a little bit more, our wisdom. So I'm fortunate that I've had a lot of people in my life. If I'm to reel off names, I think we'd be here another couple of hours. But my family, I get a lot from my brothers, Banny, my older brother Shab. He's the one who actually originally got me into bodybuilding. So it's all his fault, really. That we're now talking. My family, my wife, my kids. I think I think, you know, if you're grounded with the right people around you, you've probably heard the phrase that you're a product of 3 or 4 of the people closest to you. You know, you're probably going to echo whatever they do. So I think, you know, having people who are grounded and level-headed, that certainly helps. And, you know, if you've got a passion, you see, the thing is, John, I never ever considered myself anything more than average throughout my life. You know, I never thought that I was anything, as I say, anything more than average. So that's just me. And when I was young, I spent a lot of time on my own. I wasn't one of these that went with friends and, you know, who'd spend time going out. In a way, I've grown to like my own company, you know, being on my own. And when you can be on your own, you know, you can actually, you have a lot more time to think and a lot more time to sort of be at peace with yourself, you know, and not need constant stimulation and not need constantly going out and seeing things. So I think that's been quite helpful in getting me to where I am. You know, I've never, as I say, I've never thought that I was overly good at anything, you know, and now I do find writing very therapeutic, and especially on the subject of bodybuilding. You know, I enjoy it immensely. You know, these articles about the bodybuilders, you know, it's something that is very much a labour of love. Because when you enjoy something, it's not you know, work. It's not work. It's no chore to do. And when then, you know, you put it out there in the, you know, in the ether, and you get good feedback. And I've always said that if whatever I do or write, if it gives one person appreciates it, that validates all the work I put into it. Just one person. And, you know, as now we've got, I think we're now at about 360,000 members, and we're getting all these hundreds and hundreds of likes and comments. I think that's a validation of what we're doing is right, what we're going in the right direction, you know, because if we wasn't, you know, we wouldn't be getting the response we are. So, and I'd also like to thank you, John, because remember, as I said earlier, it was yourself that gave me this opportunity, and, you know, although he isn't with us anymore, was Glenn as well.
Oh, he's with us.
You know, is he?
Look, he's actually back. I have
to mention Glenn because he was instrumental as well in me joining, because I remember his words. He was always very appreciative of what I wrote. You know, he'd always say nice things, and you know, it's a good feeling when, you know, when somebody is giving you that kind of praise, because it motivates you to do more. You know, it makes you, fires you up to do more of the same, more improved, better stuff.
He's another person who, you know, at the time, I had to restrain him because he was driving me nuts, because he finds all this so addictive. He was light years ahead of me in where we were, and you know, he's been waiting in the wings, because he knew at some stage I was going to go back to him, and I'm going to, you know, for want of a better saying, I'm going to let him loose. Because, you know, he overly appreciates, he overly likes what you do. He's asked me to do some things which I wasn't ready to do at the time. So Glenn's back. Trust me, he's in the background. He's back, and he will be interviewed. Glenn will be interviewed. And I think there's a couple of regular people that I'm going to have on here in between all the superstars. And it's going to be you and Glenn. Because you're both industry experts, I'm surprised at the level of knowledge you have, and you'd be able to coach people, you'd be able to do everything. You're one of those individuals that's very, very capable, and the reason for that is because of your passion for this industry, which is the same with Glenn. And as much as I wanted to talk about what's in store in the future, it's probably not a good idea to do it in public right now, but we will be talking about this in our own private conversations. And I'm happy to hear that what you've got planned next is to stick around and do more of what we're doing, because there is a lot. Maz, thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you.
I hope everybody gets something out of this, and it's always good if somebody gets something out of it, like you said, even if it's one person.
Well, this is the thing, yeah, even if it's one person. So,
Maz, I would have liked to have continued, but I've got to cut it there. I still love you. We just need to end.
This video is brought to you by Terilli.com, the place to go to get in shape and stay that way. There's a free trial available with no credit card required. Terilli.com.